In most fantasy football leagues, there are only a couple weeks left to make a deal that can take your team from being a contender to a champion. Let's talk about some players I think you should go out and try to target low right now if you can. Before I get to those players, I got to remind you, this is a great time to try Underdog Fantasy if you haven't yet. They're going to give you this new customer special. Bryce Young only needs to go higher than half a yard on Thursday Night Football. I know he hasn't been great, but I bet he can get over half a yard. You take that line, you pair it with any other line you like, you can instantly triple your entry. And if you use promo code ENDGAME when you sign up, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $500. Deposit anywhere from $10 to $500 and they will instantly double it. And you can use that money right away on this new customer special or whatever else you like. Underdog Fantasy, use promo code ENDGAME. Now, I've had Jonathan Taylor on this video a few times this year, but I think really right now is going to be your last opportunity to go out and trade for him. We finally saw in week 9, he pulled away completely from Zach Moss. He had 23 touches to Zach Moss only having 7. Also, Zach Moss, not a target, not a catch. Jonathan Taylor had 5 catches in this game. That's what I really like about Jonathan Taylor this year. We're seeing something we haven't seen in years past. That's him being heavily utilized in the passing game with Gardner Minshew. This gives him a very high floor week to week, and he also has a tremendous ceiling. We know he's a talented runner. We know he can score touchdowns. This is an offense that plays fast and runs the ball. Jonathan Taylor, in my mind, is a top 10 running back, maybe even more going forward, but he's not valued that way yet. This is quite possibly your last chance. And if there's somebody in your league who still values Davante Adams as a wide receiver 1, I would happily trade him straight up for Jonathan Taylor. I would also package a wide receiver like George Pickens. Yes, he's coming off a bad game, but he has name value. People like George Pickens. They want to see him break out, and he's been good this year. Package him with a running back like Joe Mixon, who's had 2 nice games. He's scored in back-to-back games. And go get yourself a stud running back for the stretch run. Now, I also really like trading for players coming out of the bye because for some reason, when a player doesn't play for a week, people tend to value them less than they did before. And I think this is a great opportunity to go trade for Brandon Ayuk. Not only is he coming out of the bye, but he had kind of 2 down games before the bye. Brock Purdy has looked terrible for 3 straight games. People are getting nervous about this offense, but I think we're going to see a totally different San Francisco team coming out of the bye. They bolstered this defense with Chase Young. They're going to get this offense going. Brandon Ayuk is incredibly talented, and he has a fantastic rest of season schedule. I think Brandon Ayuk is going to do more what we saw early in the year to finish the season. And I'm going to say if you could trade a running back like Raheem Mostert, who continues to put up decent fantasy games, but now he's going into the bye week. And don't forget, Devon Achane probably going to be back in week 11. This is the perfect time to sell Raheem Mostert. And again, I'm going to say it's a great time to trade Joe Mixon, coming off 2 good games where he scored touchdowns. If you need a wide receiver, trade Mixon, get Ayuk. Back to running back, and I did just mention Devon Achane. They're going into the bye this week, but all reports are he should be ready coming out of the bye in week 11. If the player in your league is desperate for a win, fighting for those playoff spots, can't wait 2 more weeks for Devon Achane, he may be somebody you can go out and get relatively low based on what his value should be. And again, I'm going to say if that player needs wide receiver help and still values Davante Adams as a wide receiver 1, that might do it. Or you could package a wide receiver like Christian Kirk, who's been really good this year, and a running back like Brian Robinson, who hasn't been bad and has been finding the end zone. And maybe go out and get yourself a running back like Achane, who, if you can wait a couple weeks for, could be a league winner down the stretch. Another wide receiver that has been terrible this year but could also be a league winner down the stretch is T. Higgins. We finally saw here in week 9 what this guy is capable of. 8 catches, 110 yards, led the team in receiving, almost had a touchdown. He looks fully healthy now, but more importantly, Joe Burrow also looks fully healthy now. This offense is ready to roll rest of the season. T. Higgins was a guy going in the 3rd round. He's a young wide receiver, a stud wide receiver. There's no reason to think he won't be great rest of the season. And right now, if you could trade a running back like Jahmyr Gibbs, coming off 2 huge games before the team's bye, but we're already hearing that David Montgomery is going to be back in week 10, I think this is a great time to sell high on Jahmyr Gibbs. This is also a great time to sell high on Alexander Mattison, who now has no competition for touches with Cam Akers out for the season, scored a touchdown, looked pretty good, and you could package him with a wide receiver like Jerry Jeudy, who had a very nice game before their bye week, and people really want to buy into Jerry Jeudy being fantasy relevant. Go package these guys and get T. Higgins. Now, a wide receiver who started off great and has been terrible, but not really through any fault of his own, is DJ Moore. We're already hearing that Justin Fields may play this Thursday night. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but we got to think we're going to see him no later than week 11. And you got to remember, in the 5 games when Justin Fields was fully healthy, DJ Moore was the wide receiver 4 in PPR leagues. Getting Justin Fields back is going to be a big boost for his value. And right now, his value is very low because he's done nothing for 3 weeks. If you could trade a running back like Gus Edwards, who continues to find the end zone but doesn't really do a lot outside of that, I would happily take DJ Moore. And I would also happily trade Alexander Mattison. Coming off a very nice game, is clearly the lead back here. If the player in your league with DJ Moore needs running back help, Alexander Mattison might get it done. Now, I put Diontae Johnson on the buy low last week, and he had a huge game, but I think he's still a buy low candidate because people really want to believe in George Pickens being this upside, league winner, awesome guy, and they think of Diontae Johnson as just this kind of, safe, okay wide receiver. But he's clearly the number 1 wide receiver here. It's not even close. He's had 23 targets and 15 catches over the last 2 games now that he's been fully healthy. This is a guy that gives you a tremendously high weekly floor, and as we saw last week, he has a decent ceiling too. And again, I'm going to say, if you're deep at running back and you have Gus Edwards, this is a great time to trade Gus Edwards, coming off a 2-touchdown game where he did nothing else really. He's had 3 monster games. Trade Gus Edwards for Diontae Johnson. And again, Brian Robinson, mentioned him earlier. He's scored again. He's scored 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's got the name value. If you can use Brian Robinson to get Diontae Johnson, I think that's a win. Now, a running back I really wasn't in on in the draft process, or really this whole season so far, has been Aaron Jones. But it looks like he's finally healthy, and his value is still tremendously low because you have to go all the way back to week 1 for his last big game. Now, granted, he did have a big game in week 9, but I still feel like people are very nervous. One big game doesn't all of a sudden make people feel good. What I like to see here was not the production, it was the usage. 20 carries, 6 targets, 4 catches. He's obviously fully healthy again, and you can go get him at a very low price relative to his ceiling. This is a guy that at least is a decent RB2 with some upside. And if you could trade a wide receiver like Mike Evans, who continues to find the end zone but hasn't really done a lot outside of that recently, I would happily take Aaron Jones. I would also trade a wide receiver like Terry McLaurin. Sure, he's been good, but not a ton of upside in this offense. If you need a running back and you're deep at wide receiver, Terry McLaurin for Aaron Jones seems fair. Now, I mentioned Javonte Williams on last week's video as well, but there's still a chance to go out and trade for him because he's coming out of the bye week, didn't play in week 9, so his value hasn't really changed. This is a guy we saw really starting to come on before the bye week. In the last 2 games before the bye, he had 42 carries and 7 targets. Now, look, he's never going to be, a top 10, top 5 RB1, especially coming off that devastating knee injury, but he's good enough to be an upside RB2, especially if he's going to get this kind of volume. And again, I'm going to say, if you could trade a wide receiver like Mike Evans, you're deep at the position, you need running back help, that feels fair. As does, once again, Terry McLaurin, if you're deep at wide receiver and you need a running back. Another buy low running back I mentioned last week is Jerome Ford, and I think there's still an opportunity to go trade for Jerome Ford because he didn't have a great game. But look at the usage he got. There is no doubt here that Jerome Ford is the lead back, and he's not just the lead back, he's the workhorse running back. He had 20 carries and 5 receptions in this game, still dealing with that ankle injury. He's only going to get more and more healthy, and we know the lead running back in this Browns offense has value, and you got to love his usage in the passing game. It gives him a very high floor in PPR leagues, and he has upside. This is a guy with big playability. Got a nose for the end zone. This is one of my favorite buy low running backs. This is a guy that can truly put your team over the top down the stretch. And I think right now you could trade a wide receiver like Jakobi Meyers. He scored, albeit it was a rushing touchdown, but he's been great this year. He still has value. If somebody in your league doesn't really need Jerome Ford and they need wide receiver help, Jakobi might do it. Or a wide receiver like Jahan Dotson. He's had 3 nice games in a row, but there's still a lot of risk here. I'd much rather have the running back, especially if Jahan Dotson is just one of my bench wide receivers. All right, one more wide receiver to recommend for you, and time is running out if you want to get Jackson Smith-Njigba. We see it every year. Rookie wide receivers come on late. We're starting to see this guy come on. Ever since the team's bye, he's gotten more and more involved. And in week 9, he actually led this team in receptions and receiving yards. Now, granted, he didn't have a big game. that is why he's still a buy low, because he's only going to get better and better as the season goes on, but he hasn't really done a whole lot, so his value is still depressed. And I'm going to say you could trade a running back like Jaylen Warren. I know people still expect him to take over this backfield. Oh, he's better than Najee. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but it's Najee's backfield until further notice. Or a tight end like Jake Ferguson. He's had 2 huge games, but if you grabbed him off the waiver wire for a bye week and you already have a really good tight end, you can go ahead and flip a tight end you just grabbed off the waivers for a wide receiver like Jackson Smith-Njigba, who could be a league winner. And then one more running back. I know Chuba Hubbard didn't boom in week 9 the way I had hoped, but this is clearly his backfield. 63% of the snaps, had 22 opportunities. Miles Sanders only had 11. Yeah, he wasn't great. He's on the Panthers. He doesn't have tons of weekly upside. But if you need a volume running back with a decent floor who has touchdown potential, Chuba Hubbard is that guy. It's his backfield, and it's going to take next to nothing to go get him. Again, I'm going to say a wide receiver like Jahan Dotson. If you're deep at wide receiver, maybe you picked up Jahan Dotson a few weeks ago off a waiver wire. I think he can get you Chuba Hubbard if you need a running back. Or you might be able to trade running back Kareem Hunt straight up for Chuba Hubbard. Kareem Hunt continues to score touchdowns, but he really does nothing outside of that. And like I said, this is Jerome Ford's backfield. Now is the time to trade Kareem Hunt before he stops scoring touchdowns. Hey, we have everything you need to dominate your Week 10 matchup. Who to start, who to sit, who could boom, who to grab off waiver wire. Everything you need, you can find it right here in our Week 10 playlist.